Okay, so you know that image that always comes up when talking about Gangnam? The one with the cow plowing a field with those massive, like, futuristic Apgujeong apartments in the background?
Yeah, yeah, I've seen that one.
It's such a striking image, right? You can't help but think, what's going on here?
It's almost like a visual metaphor for the crazy fast development of Seoul, especially Gangnam.
Exactly. And it's not just some random photo op, you
Yeah.
know? It actually speaks volumes about South Korea's insanely rapid modernization. Like, they went from rural to super urban in the blink of an eye.
It's pretty mind-blowing when you stop and think about it.
Totally. And when
Yeah.
you really dig into what fueled that development, especially in Gangnam, you bump right into the story of the person and the company we're going deep on today.
Makes sense. Gangnam's rise is practically synonymous with South Korea's economic boom, and you can't talk about that without talking about Hyundai.
Right. You wanted to understand the whole deal with the Hyundai name, where it came from, how it became this global giant, the whole 9 yards. And the answer? Well, it all boils down to the ambition and pure, unadulterated drive of one man, Chung Ju-yung.
So this deep dive is basically your all-access pass to the epic saga of Hyundai, from its super humble beginnings to its current global powerhouse status. And all because of this one incredibly determined guy.
It's a wild ride, let me tell you. And we've got some amazing material to work with to explore all of this.
Okay, so to make sure we're on the same page, it sounds like you're not just interested in the what of Hyundai's history, but also the why behind its explosive growth.
Totally. Like, how do they go from 0 to 100 so fast?
Gotcha. Well, we've got a few key sources to help us unpack that. There's this super compelling video that highlights Chung Ju-young's spirit of challenge by looking at the building of the Soyang River Dam, which is a story in itself. Then there's another video that gives a broader overview of his life and the rise of Hyundai chronologically.
Nice. So we have the up-close and personal view and the big picture view.
Precisely. And to round things out, we've got a CNBC report that analyzes where Hyundai stands globally right now, plus some extra info laying out important historical facts and milestones.
Awesome. Okay, let's get this show on the road. Let's rewind all the way back to the beginning. Chung Ju-yung was born way back in 1915 in a place called Tongkang, which is now in North Korea. Back then, Korea was under the thumb of Japanese colonial rule, which was pretty brutal. And his early life, let's just say it was tough. Extreme poverty on a farm with a huge family to feed, the whole 9 yards.
It's hard to even imagine that level of poverty, the constant struggle to just survive, the fear of famine. If the harvest was bad, it really puts things into perspective.
Yeah, talk about a harsh reality check.
Yeah.
And he had dreams. He wanted to be a teacher. But being the oldest of 7 kids, that was just a pipe dream. He was stuck in this endless cycle of farm work. And that idea really got to him. It weighed him down.
You can sense this feeling of being trapped, like his future was already written for him and it was nothing but back-breaking labor. And that, I think, is what really lit a fire under him.
It makes you wonder what would happen if he hadn't felt so stuck.
Right, like if he'd had more options.
Exactly. So he tried to break free, to escape that predetermined life. And not just once, but several times. He ran away from home to find something better in the cities, like Kawan and Seoul.
And these weren't just impulsive decisions. They were full-on journeys, often on foot, through some pretty rough terrain. Even when he found work in the city, usually construction gigs, the pay was terrible. But the point is, he was independent, scraping by on his own, and that was better than being back on that farm.
But every time, his dad would track him down and drag him back home.
That's rough.
Yeah, and you can imagine the lectures he got, right?
Yeah.
His dad basically told him he was meant to be a farmer, that the cities were full of jobless grads, and that a nobody farm boy like him didn't stand a chance.
Wow, talk about a motivational speech. I bet that totally crushed his spirit.
You'd think so, right? But it actually had the opposite effect. It fueled his determination even more. It was like, oh yeah, watch me.
I love that. He basically took his dad's negativity and turned it into rocket fuel.
Totally. But the final straw was another bad harvest. They literally had no food for the coming winter. That's when Chung Ju-yung made his fourth and final escape. This time, there was no turning back.
He was done with farming. He'd reached his breaking point.
Yep, he was determined to make it in the city no matter what. He took any job he could find, laborer, construction worker, even a handyman at a starch syrup factory.
Yeah.
You name it, he probably did it.
Gotta respect the hustle.
Seriously. But the real game changer during those early years was when he landed a job at the Bokong rice store.
Ah, this is where things start to take shape.
Right. This was his first taste of stability. He started out delivering rice by bicycle, but the dude was a workaholic, super dependable and all that. Within 6 months, bam, he's promoted to store accountant.
Sounds like he impressed the right people.
Big time. And get this, the owner gets sick and decides to sell the whole business to Chung Ju-yung.
No way. Talk about being in the right place at the right time.
Right, so at just 22 years old, he becomes the owner of the Bokong Rice Store, renames it Kungol Rice Store, and turns it into a total success by offering rock-bottom prices. His profits just kept climbing year after year. He was a bona fide businessman making it happen.
This early success really highlights some key traits that would define his whole career. Crazy hard work, sharp business sense, and a willingness to take risks. He was a natural, even without any fancy education.
Totally. But then, as always, there's a plot twist. The Japanese, remember them, they were at war with China and slapped Korea with this harsh rice rationing system. And that, my friend, was a major blow to rice merchants like Chung Ju-yung. He was forced to close up shop.
Oof, talk about bad timing. So it wasn't his fault, really? It was just the political climate screwing things up.
Exactly. It was totally out of his control. But this guy was resilient. He went back to his village, but he never gave up on his dream of a better life.
He was like a phoenix, always rising from the ashes.
Totally. So in 1940, he's back in the city, ready for round two. He's looking for businesses that weren't under the Japanese thumb, and boom, auto repair. There was a huge demand for it, but not many shops, and the ones that existed charged an arm and a leg. Chung Ju-yung, even though he knew nothing about cars, hired a top-notch mechanic and undercut everyone's prices.
Our move.
Right? High demand, low prices, good service. It was a recipe for success. Ito's service garage, as he called it, was killing it. He had to hire more mechanics just to keep up. But then, wham, another curveball. A fire breaks out and destroys everything, the shop, equipment, customers' cars, the whole shebang.
Oh no, not again. I mean, how much bad luck can one person have?
I know, right? He was in serious debt, back to square one. You'd think he'd throw in the towel, wouldn't you?
I'd be tempted to.
Seriously. But Chung Ju-yung, he's not like us mere mortals. He takes out another loan and reopens in a bustling part of the city. And guess what? Within 2 years, Ito's Service Garage is the top dog in Seoul, employing over 70 people. Talk about a comeback.
Okay, this guy's officially made of steel. Seriously impressive.
I know, right? It's like every setback just made him stronger. But just when he's planning to expand even further, bam, World War II kicks off.
Uh-oh, here we go again.
Yeah. In 1942, the Japanese, those guys, again, they decide to take over his booming business and merge it with a steel plant because, war efforts and all that. So Chung Ju-yung has to pack up and head back to his village. Again.
It's like history keeps repeating itself.
I know. But here's the thing. This time, he wasn't going back empty-handed. He'd managed to save up a good chunk of money, 50,000 won.
Not bad.
Right. And he's got his eyes on the prize, ready for his next big move. Little did he know that this next venture would change everything, his life and South Korea's future.
Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat. What happens next?
World War II ends, Korea gets its independence, and Chung Ju-yung wastes no time. In 1946, he's back in the game, reopening his service garage with a brand new name, Hyundai Auto Service Center.
Oh.
Hyundai, meaning modern.
Ooh, I like that. It's like he was saying, we're leaving the past behind and embracing the future.
Exactly. He was all about progress and rebuilding a nation. And the business took off like a rocket. He was servicing abandoned Japanese cars, U.S. military trucks, everything. By the end of that first year, he had 3 times more employees than before.
This guy doesn't mess around. He sees an opportunity and he grabs it with both hands.
Totally. His family even joins him in the South and helps out with the business. But while the auto repair shop was doing great, he noticed something else. These massive construction contracts with the U.S. Army. We're talking way bigger scale and way more money than his little shop.
Nah, so he's thinking bigger picture now.
Yep, he saw the potential in construction, especially with the U.S. Army needing so much infrastructure built after the war. It was a no-brainer. So in 1947, he founded Hyundai Construction Company.
And just like that, a construction empire is born.
Not so fast. It wasn't all smooth sailing at first. They were struggling to get enough work to stay afloat, mostly building U.S. Army quarters and doing repairs. It wasn't until 1950 that things started looking up.
But then, the Korean War breaks out. Talk about terrible timing.
I know, right? Another major crisis. Chung Ju-yung has to abandon his business again and flee to Busan with basically nothing.
This guy just can't catch a break. It's like every time he gets ahead, something knocks him back down.
I know. But here's the thing. He's got this crazy resilience. He never gives up. So there he is in Busan, struggling to survive with his brother, doing odd jobs, delivering newspapers, you name it.
Talk about hitting rock bottom.
Seriously. But then, fate steps in. The U.S. Army needs someone to build stuff, and fast. Enter Chung Ju-yung, stage right.
Ah, the phoenix rises again.
Exactly. He sees this as his chance to get back in the game. He starts building barracks for thousands of American soldiers, proving himself to be reliable and efficient. This connection with the U.S. Army would turn out to be a game changer. He even starts taking on bigger, more prestigious projects, like renovating a U.S. military HQ and building a place for the U.S. president to stay when he visits.
So he's basically becoming the U.S. Army's go-to guy in South Korea.
Pretty much.
Uh,
And by the time the Korean War ends, Hyundai is in prime position to snag pretty much every construction contract the U.S. Army throws their way.
Smart move.
Right. It was a steady stream of work that allowed the company to grow like crazy and establish a strong foundation. And remember, South Korea was devastated after the war. The U.S. government poured billions of dollars into rebuilding the country's infrastructure.
Oh, so another golden opportunity for Hyundai.
You got it. Chung Ju-yung jumps at the chance and wins the contract to restore the Goryeo Bridge in 1953. It was the biggest infrastructure project in the country at the time.
This is huge. He's basically rebuilding South Korea piece by piece.
You think so, right. But this project turned into a bit of a nightmare. Chung Ju-yung was still relatively new to such large-scale construction projects. He didn't have the right equipment, safety protocols were lacking, and he just didn't have the experience. So what happens? Delays, accidents on the work site, and then inflation hits, eating away at his profits.
Oof, talk about a recipe for disaster. So this dream project turned into a financial burden.
It was brutal. He burned through all his money, had to take out more loans. His brothers even had to sell their homes to help cover the costs, especially paying the workers. And even after all that, they ended up with massive losses.
Ouch, that must have been incredibly tough on him and his family.
It was. His brothers were practically destitute, living in makeshift shelters. Chung Ju-yung felt responsible and swore he'd not only build them back a successful business, but he'd create the biggest, most influential company in all of South Korea. He saw this failure as a harsh lesson learned.
A very expensive lesson.
Seriously. But here's the silver lining. Despite the financial lows, Hyundai got a surprisingly high credit rating from the Ministry of Interior for completing the bridge. That opened doors for future loans. And more importantly, his buddy-buddy relationship with the U.S. Army allowed him to finally buy the heavy construction equipment he desperately needed.
So he turned a major setback into a strategic advantage.
Exactly. He learned from his mistakes and came back stronger. With this new equipment, Hyundai could now bid competitively and win tons of reconstruction projects all over South Korea. They built roads, bridges, dams, buildings, you name it. They were on a roll.
So he essentially helped rebuild South Korea after the war and built his own company into a powerhouse in the process.
And his ambitions didn't stop there. He wanted to go global. So he sets his sights on international projects, making Hyundai the first Korean construction company to venture overseas. He wins these multi-billion-dollar projects in Saudi Arabia, like the massive Jubail Industrial Harbor, and in Bahrain, the Arab shipbuilding and repair yard.
Wow, he's not messing around. He's thinking big global domination.
Totally. He went from struggling local entrepreneur to global tycoon in just a couple of decades. His dream of building the biggest firm in South Korea was a reality by 1960.
This is an incredible story of ambition and resilience. But I'm curious, how much of this success was due to his own hard work, and how much was due to external factors?
That's a great question. And it's important to remember that South Korea's government had a big hand in this too. They were actively promoting economic development and gave preferential treatment to big family-owned businesses like Hyundai, which they called chaebols.
So they were basically the chosen ones, the champions of South Korean industry.
Exactly. They got financial support, loan guarantees, tax breaks, the whole 9 yards. And to be fair, these cables played a huge role in South Korea's economic miracle.
So it was a mutually beneficial relationship. The government supported them, and they helped drive the country's rapid industrialization.
It was a risky strategy, concentrating so much power in the hands of a few families, but it worked. And Chung Ju-yung, with his do-or-die attitude and ability to deliver on massive projects, well, he was their golden boy.
It seems like he always had his eye on the future, constantly looking for the next big opportunity.
He was restless, always pushing the boundaries. He diversified Hyundai into shipbuilding, retail, electronics, finance, you name it. But there was one industry he always had a soft spot for, one that he had tried and failed at earlier in his career: automobiles.
Ah, the one that got away.
Exactly. So in the 1960s, the South Korean government decided they wanted to build up their own domestic car industry. They made a rule that foreign car makers had to partner with local businesses if they wanted to operate in the country. It was a smart move to boost their own manufacturing capabilities.
So it's like, hey, if you want to sell cars here, you got to help us build them too.
Exactly. And Chung Ju-yung, being the opportunist he was, saw this as his chance to finally conquer the car market. He established his Hyundai Motor Company in 1967 and teams up with Ford, licensing their designs. And get this, in less than 6 months, he builds a massive factory in Ulsan. By 1968, the first Hyundai Cortina rolls off the assembly line.
That's lightning speed. He didn't waste any time. But hold on, wasn't the Cortina a British car?
It was. And it was a decent car in the UK and other places with good roads. But in South Korea, not so much. Back then, many roads were unpaved, and the Cortina, designed for smooth tarmac, was practically undrivable in many areas. It became a laughingstock.
Ouch, that's gotta hurt. Talk about a major miscalculation.
And to make matters worse, the Ulsan factory gets hit by a massive flood in 1969. Equipment damaged, car parts ruined, the whole shebang. There were even rumors that Hyundai was trying to sell water-damaged cars. Their reputation took a serious hit.
So not only were the cars not suitable for the roads, but now they were potentially damaged goods.
It was a mess. They were on the verge of bankruptcy. But Chung Ju-yung, he's not one to give up easily. He famously said he'd never take down a single Hyundai sign. He's determined to make it work. And eventually, as road conditions in South Korea improved, Cortina sales started to pick up.
So he weathered the storm and came out on top. Again.
But the relationship with Ford started to sour. They didn't want Hyundai selling their jointly produced cars overseas, saying the deal was only for the Korean market. And they weren't keen on sharing profits fairly either.
So basically, Ford was using Hyundai as a cheap manufacturing arm, trying to control the Korean market themselves.
Exactly. Chung Ju-yung felt like he was being exploited, that Hyundai's growth was being stifled. So in 1974, he does something pretty bold.
Yeah.
He ends the partnership with Ford. He decides to go it alone and build his own car, his way.
Wow, talk about a power move. He's basically saying, we don't need you, we can do this ourselves.
It was a huge gamble, but it paid off. He teams up with Mitsubishi for engines and axles and hires talented European engineers to help design a brand new car. And the result? The Hyundai Pony, launched in 1975. It was the first mass-produced South Korean car, built tough for Korean roads and priced affordably for the local market.
So he learned from his mistakes with the Cortina and created a car that was actually suited for the local conditions.
Exactly. And the Pony was a smash hit. It became so popular that at one point, 4 out of every 10 cars sold in South Korea were ponies. They even started exporting them, and the Pony became a bestseller in Canada.
Wow, he finally cracked the car market.
But the U.S. market, the biggest prize, was still out of reach. The Pony didn't meet U.S. emission standards. But Chung Ju-yung wasn't deterred. He develops the Hyundai Excel, specifically designed for the U.S. market, and finally breaks into the American market in 1986.
That's persistence. But how did the Excel do in the U.S.?
Initially, it was a massive success. It was super cheap, almost half the price of other new cars, and it looked pretty good, thanks to a design by the famous Giorgetto Giugiaro. Plus, American consumers were starting to trust Asian cars for their quality and reliability. They sold hundreds of thousands of Excels in the first year.
So he finally conquered America. But something tells me there's more to the story.
You're right, the honeymoon phase didn't last long. American buyers quickly realized that the early Hyundai models weren't as reliable as their Japanese counterparts. They needed frequent repairs, and the Hyundai name became a bit of a joke, like, hope you understand nothing's drivable and inexpensive.
Ouch, that's gotta sting. So their initial success was built on price, not quality.
Pretty much. But this time, it wasn't Chung Ju-yung at the helm. It was his son, Chun Mong-koo, who took over and decided to fix this quality problem once and for all. He benchmarked Hyundai against the best Toyota. Honda implemented strict quality control throughout the manufacturing process and invested heavily in R&D to improve their engineering.
So a shift in leadership and a major focus on quality.
Exactly. And to prove they were serious, they introduced a 10-year, 100,000-mile powertrain warranty in the early 2000s. It was a bold move, a real game changer in the industry. And it set a clear message. Hyundai was committed to quality and stood behind its products.
So they put their money where their mouth was. That's a powerful statement.
Totally. Another major development was the acquisition of Kia Motors in 1998 during the Asian financial crisis. That led to the formation of the Hyundai Motor Group, a much bigger, more powerful entity.
So they joined forces, pooling resources and expertise.
Precisely. They shared technology, streamlined manufacturing, and leveraged their combined talent. They even poached top designers and engineers from European car makers, people like Peter Schreier, Luke Dockerwolk, and Albert Biermann. That really elevated Hyundai's design and performance, transforming them from a budget brand to a serious contender.
So they went from cheap and cheerful to stylish and sophisticated.
And it worked. Hyundai and Kia started winning awards, gaining recognition for their design and innovation. And then came the electric vehicle revolution, and they were ready for it. They've had huge success with models like the Hyundai Ioniq 5 and the Kia EV6.
These are some of the best EVs on the market right now. They're giving Tesla a run for its money.
Absolutely. And guess what? The Hyundai Motor Group is now the third largest automaker in the world. They've come a long way from those early days of unreliable cars.
It's an incredible story of transformation. But what about the future? Where are they headed next?
They're not resting on their laurels, that's for sure. They're investing heavily in robotics, autonomous driving, even flying taxis. They're aiming to be a leader in future mobility, not just a car company.
That's ambitious. But it's also smart. The automotive industry is changing rapidly, and they're adapting.
They've had their share of challenges, of course. Vehicle thefts, recalls, labor issues, and navigating those tricky international trade policies, like the U.S. EV tax credit that initially put foreign car makers at a disadvantage. But they're addressing these issues head-on. They're building new EV and battery factories in the U.S., showing their commitment to the American market.
So they're not shying away from challenges. They're facing them head-on.
Exactly. And they're still innovating. They're developing hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, implementing sustainable manufacturing processes, even partnering with Amazon for online car sales. They're thinking outside the box, always looking for new ways to stay ahead of the curve.
It's truly remarkable how far they've come. But what about Chung Ju-yung? What happened to him?
Sadly, he passed away in 2001. But he left behind an incredible legacy. He wasn't just a businessman, he was a philanthropist too. He even tried to reunite North and South Korea by sending a whole herd of cattle across the border.
That's a powerful image of peace and reconciliation.
It was. Sadly, it didn't quite work out as he hoped. But his vision and determination were truly remarkable.
Absolutely. And his passing led to a bit of a power struggle among his sons for control of the Hyundai empire. It was dubbed the War of the Princes.
Yeah, it was a messy affair. But ultimately, the Hyundai Group was divided into several independent companies, and his son Chung Ju-yung took over Hyundai Motor Group, leading it to its current global success.
So the legacy continues. It's amazing to think how one man's vision and determination could create such a powerful and influential company.
So after this deep dive, what have we learned? Chung Ju-young's life is a testament to the power of pure grit and determination. He challenged conventional thinking, as we saw with his unconventional proposal for the Soyang River Dam, and he never gave up on his vision, even after facing countless setbacks.
And Hyundai's journey mirrors that spirit. It's a story of continuous evolution, from a small, struggling company to a global automotive giant. They've shown remarkable ability to learn from their mistakes, adapt to changing circumstances, and constantly strive for innovation and improvement.
The biggest takeaway for me is that Hyundai's story is more than just a business story. It's intertwined with the story of South Korea's incredible rise from poverty to prosperity. It's about ambition, resilience, and defying the odds.
It's truly inspiring, and it makes you wonder, what impossible challenges are we facing in our own lives? What can we learn from Chung Ju-young's unwavering spirit and ability to turn crises into opportunities? What seemingly insurmountable obstacles can we overcome with that same level of determination?
It's definitely something to think about. If Chung Ju-yung could build Hyundai from nothing, imagine what you can achieve if we set our minds to it and never give up.
It's a powerful message. We all have the potential to make a difference, to create something meaningful, no matter how challenging the path may seem. Chung Ju-young's life and Hyundai's story are a testament to that.
Thanks for joining me on this incredible journey.
It was my pleasure.